morning to our Avenue Missionary Baptist Church family and our friends who's watching us, whether it's on Facebook Live or on our YouTube. But my name is Minister Jeremiah Narcisse Sr., and I come to give you our Sunday school highlights for this morning. Our lesson today talks about justice prevails. It's found in Esther chapter 7, beginning at verse 1 throughout verse 10. The writer of this book of Esther is unknown. However, some credits Mordecai as the writer of this book. The name Esther is in the Hebrew means the scroll. It is one of the 5 scrolls in the Hebrew Bible. The book of Esther is named after the woman in the lesson named Esther. However, her Jewish name was Hadassah, but her name was changed when she became the new queen to King Ahasuerus. Took her as his new wife. He selected Esther to be his wife after his last wife disobeyed his orders as king. The custom of those times, other than God, that the king was the highest in command, and anyone that disobeyed the king, you face severe consequences at that time. And the custom of the time, it was important that you obeyed the king and did what the king instructed for you to do. It is important to know that the book of Esther, as well as Songs of Solomon, never mentions God by his name. You never see or hear the name God mentioned by his name. However, it still displays his power, his authority, his deity, him being the self-existent God, him having his hand on those people, him having his covering, his protection. You still see all of that throughout that book. And you still see others showing they still have enough faith in him throughout the book. But you would never see his name mentioned by the name God. But once again, just because you don't see it mentioned, that doesn't mean his presence wasn't there. Esther had a cousin named Mordecai who adopted Esther, and because she was an orphan child, and he took her as his own daughter. He raised Esther. He treated Esther as his own daughter. The summary of the first part of our lesson talks about pride before the fall. It talks about pride before the fall. In this lesson, there's a guy by the name of Haman. Haman was second in command. He was the prime minister. He was second in command outside of the king. And back in chapter 3, Haman wanted the Jews to worship him, to bow down to him. But Mordecai, the one who adopted Esther, Mordecai refused to bow down and worship this Haman. So this infuriated him. Haman was livid. Haman literally hated Mordecai. So what he did was he goes and talks to the king, and he gets permission to have Mordecai murdered. And he tells him that the Jews were rebelling against the king and his laws. So this decree is signed for Mordecai to be able to have this king was signed so Haman can murder Mordecai. The king agreed to let him murder Mordecai, but something happened. Mordecai goes to Esther, his adopted daughter, and he tells her, I need some help. And Esther didn't look at her current position and forget where she come from. Because Esther, before she became queen, she was a Jew herself. But Esther, as our lesson says, Esther was reluctant to help Mordecai because she knew that she couldn't just go into the king's chamber without being summoned for. If you went into this king's chamber, chamber, you will have a death penalty on your life, or you will be facing severe consequences. But Mordecai lets Esther know that Haman went to the king. He got permission to murder me and everyone else, all the Jews that were associated with me. So Esther walks by faith. Esther exercises her faith, and she goes into this king's chamber, and she asks her husband, she says, King, if you find any favor in me, if it be your will, King, would you please spare my life? And not only my life, would you spare those around me as well? All my Jewish people, would you save my people? So the king says to her, I don't know what you're talking about. Why is it that you feel that your life isn't being spared? Why do you feel as if something is going to happen to your people? And she tells the king, the adversary, this Haman, this evil Haman, who you promoted as prime minister, has this plot to not only murder Mordecai, but all those who are associated with him. And my brothers and my sisters, don't that sound familiar? That every time you're trying to do something good, that you have people stabbing on your back, you have people hating on you, you have people setting traps for you, you have people trying to literally take you out because you choose to do the right thing. Don't that sound familiar? And that's exactly what happened in this lesson, that this Mordecai, who discovered the plan of this Haman, this evil plot that he had to go into the king and get permission to murder him because he refused to bow down. This pride he had about himself, that he was so self-centered, he was so self-righteous that he had to have himself patted on the back. He had to have people bowing down to him. He had to have people reverencing him. And if you didn't do it, he would go as so far to allow you, to have you murdered. So what happens is he builds this plot. He builds this scheme to have Mordecai hung and to have him murdered. But what happens is once Esther reveals to King what the plan was, now the second part of the lesson talks about this plot comes to light. Verses 5 through 10. Mordecai seeks help from Esther. Esther goes and gets the help that Mordecai needs, not only for himself, but for those around him. And this plan that Haman had for Mordecai ended up backfiring. And as a consequence of Haman's actions, the plot to have Mordecai killed is the very thing that happened to him. My brothers and my sisters, the old saying is, when you dig one ditch, you might as well dig two. Because the ditch that you're digging for me, someone else could be digging for you. So when you try to harm others, just remember that just always it can happen to you as well. So I hope this lesson finds you somewhere that you can go and you can have a delightful week, that you can share this with someone else, knowing that justice has prevailed and that every time you need the Lord the most, He'll always be there for you. God bless you and God keep you is my prayer.